A young family vanished during a routine hike in the Smoky Mountains. 4 years of silence followed until a licensed ginseng hunter unearthed something that would crack open one of Tennessee's most disturbing mysteries. Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dive mystery cases. The first missed call came at 6:47 p.m. on June 14, 2015. Patricia Brennan stared at her phone, watching it ring for the third time in 20 minutes. Her daughter's name glowed on the screen, Hannah Whitfield. But Patricia wasn't calling Hannah. Hannah was supposed to be calling her. The Whitfields had left 3 days earlier for what Marcus called Lily's first real adventure, a long weekend exploring the accessible trails of Great Smoky Mountains National Park, straddling the Tennessee-North Carolina border. Marcus Whitfield, 34, worked as a park ranger at a smaller state park 2 hours south. He knew wilderness protocol inside and out. Hannah, 31, taught second grade and approached motherhood with the same careful planning she brought to her classroom. 7-month-old Lily was at that perfect age, old enough to enjoy new sights and sounds, young enough to sleep through the hiking motion in her carrier. The itinerary Marcus had emailed Patricia was conservative: paved trails, designated picnic areas, popular overlooks where cell service was reliable. They'd check in every evening at 6 o'clock without fail. It was now past 7. Patricia called again. The line didn't ring this time. It went straight to a generic voicemail greeting. She tried Marcus's phone. Same result. The knot in her stomach tightened. Hannah had been religious about communication since Lily's birth. Even during a weekend camping trip last fall, she'd found a way to send a text every few hours, updating Patricia with photos of the baby bundled in a sleeping bag, grinning at a campfire. The silence now felt wrong, heavy with implication. By 9 o'clock, Patricia was pacing her living room in Knoxville. By midnight, she'd convinced herself there was a rational explanation: dead phones, a spontaneous detour to an area without service. Maybe they'd decided to camp an extra night. But when dawn broke on June 15th and her phone remained silent, the fear crystallized into something concrete. She called the Sevier County Sheriff's Office. The deputy who took the report was professional but measured. Missing persons cases involving adults required a waiting period, unless there were signs of immediate danger. Patricia explained that her son-in-law was a park ranger, that they had a 7-month-old baby, that they would never go this long without contact. The deputy's tone shifted. He took down the details and promised to escalate the report. Within hours, the information reached the National Park Service rangers who managed the vast expanse of the Smokies. The park covered over 500,000 acres of rugged mountain terrain, split between 2 states. If the family was in trouble somewhere in that wilderness, time was critical. Investigators began by tracing the digital footprint. In 2015, smartphones were ubiquitous, but their usefulness depended entirely on finding a signal. The Great Smokies were notorious for dead zones, thick canopy, deep valleys, and the sheer mass of ancient mountains created a patchwork of connectivity. The breakthrough came from cloud storage. Hannah's phone had been set to automatically upload photos and videos whenever it detected Wi-Fi or a strong data signal. Investigators accessed her account and found something that had synced 2 days prior, a short video, time-stamped 11:23 a.m. on June 13th. The clip was only 11 seconds long, but it became the centerpiece of the investigation. The video opened with Hannah's face filling the frame, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, sunglasses perched on her head. She was smiling, slightly out of breath. "Day 2 of Operation Get Lily to Love Nature," she said, her voice bright with happiness. The camera panned right, showing Marcus walking ahead on a wide dirt trail. He wore a faded green National Park Service t-shirt and khaki cargo shorts, a blue baby carrier strapped to his chest. Lily's tiny hand was visible, reaching up to grab at Marcus's beard. The trail was surrounded by towering hardwoods, oaks, maples, and hickories. their canopy creating dappled shadows on the path. In the background, the distinctive purple-blue ridges of the Smoky Mountains were visible through a gap in the trees. "Marcus, wave to Grandma," Hannah called out. Marcus turned, grinned, and gave an exaggerated wave. Lily squealed. The video ended. The metadata embedded in the file provided GPS coordinates. Investigators pinpointed the location to a moderately popular trail in the Cades Cove area of the park, known for its historic buildings and wildlife viewing opportunities. It was exactly the kind of family-friendly destination Marcus would choose. Rangers were dispatched to the trailhead immediately. They found the Whitfield's vehicle, a silver Honda CR-V, parked in the designated lot. The car was locked. No signs of disturbance. The windows were slightly dusty. A parking permit, dated June 12th, was displayed on the dashboard. The discovery confirmed the timeline. The family had started their hike as planned. They'd made it at least a day and a half into their trip. And then something had stopped them from returning. The mobilization was immediate and massive. Great Smoky Mountains National Park is not just America's most visited national park, it's also one of its most dangerous. The terrain varies wildly from gentle valleys to steep, rocky ridges. The weather can shift in minutes. Black bears are common. Rattlesnakes inhabit the lower elevations, and the dense vegetation can swallow a person whole just 20 feet from a marked trail. Search and rescue coordinators assembled teams at dawn on June 16th. More than 60 trained personnel were deployed, including K-9 units, technical rescue specialists, and volunteer searchers familiar with the park's backcountry. Helicopters were scrambled, though their effectiveness was limited. The forest canopy in summer was so thick that infrared cameras could barely penetrate to the ground. Patricia Brennan drove through the night from Knoxville, arriving at the incident command post by sunrise. She brought photographs of the family, detailed descriptions of their gear, and a mother's desperate hope that this was all a terrible misunderstanding. The rangers asked careful questions. Was Marcus prone to taking risks? Could he have gone off-trail for a better view? Patricia was adamant. Marcus was cautious to a fault, especially with Lily. He'd worked in parks for over a decade. He'd seen what happened to people who underestimated the wilderness. She described the baby carrier Marcus used, a high-end ergonomic model in navy blue with orange accents. She listed the contents of the diaper bag Hannah always carried: bottles, formula, a changing pad, Lily's favorite blanket covered in yellow ducks. She showed them a photo of Lily from the week before the trip, a chubby, smiling baby with wispy blonde hair and her mother's dark eyes. The search teams fanned out from the trailhead, moving in grid patterns. The initial focus was the main trail system where the video had been recorded. Teams pushed out in every direction, calling the families' names, listening for any response. The K-9 units worked the trail trying to pick up a scent. The forest swallowed their voices. Days became a week. The search area expanded exponentially, covering dozens of square miles. Volunteers from surrounding counties joined the effort. News crews set up at the park entrance, broadcasting updates that grew increasingly grim. The statistics were brutal. In wilderness search and rescue, the first 72 hours are critical. After that, survival rates plummet. The Whitfields had now been missing for over a week. Despite the exhaustive efforts, the search yielded nothing. No abandoned gear, no footprints leading off trail, no scraps of clothing caught on branches, no sign of a campsite. It was as if the family had simply evaporated into the mountain air. Investigators began exploring alternative theories. The video showed them on a well-traveled trail. Could they have encountered someone else? The park saw millions of visitors annually. What if they'd crossed paths with someone dangerous? Detectives interviewed other hikers who'd been in the area that weekend. A retired couple from Ohio remembered seeing a young family matching the description on June 13th, near a scenic overlook. They'd exchanged pleasantries about the weather and the baby. The couple remembered nothing unusual, no one following the family, no concerning interactions. Another lead emerged from an unexpected source. 2 weeks into the search, a park ranger conducting a routine patrol in a remote section discovered evidence of illegal activity: fresh chainsaw cuts on several old-growth trees and drag marks where logs had been hauled out. Timber poaching. The illegal harvesting of trees from national parks was a lucrative black market. Poachers targeted specific species, black walnut, cherry, old-growth poplar, that could fetch thousands of dollars. The operations were typically run by individuals who knew the backcountry intimately and valued their secrecy above all else. A new, darker theory took shape. What if Marcus and Hannah had stumbled upon an active poaching operation? What if they'd witnessed something they weren't supposed to see? For several weeks, investigators pursued this angle with intensity. They analyzed the poaching site, trying to determine when the trees had been cut. They interviewed informants in the regional timber black market. They pulled records on known poachers operating in eastern Tennessee. The timing was close. The poaching had occurred sometime in mid-June, but investigators couldn't establish a definitive connection. The poaching site was nearly 4 miles from where the family's video had been recorded, separated by rough terrain that Marcus, carrying a baby, would have been unlikely to traverse. By late July, the active search was scaled back. The incident command post was dismantled. The volunteers went home. The case remained open, but the resources required to maintain such an operation were unsustainable. Patricia Brennan returned to Knoxville, her life suspended in agonizing uncertainty. She printed missing person flyers and posted them across 3 states. She maintained a Facebook page dedicated to finding her daughter's family. She called the sheriff's office every week. The forest kept its secrets. 4 years passed. September 11, 2019, dawned cool and overcast in the Smokies. Dale Hutchins loaded his gear into his pickup truck before sunrise: a small shovel, a soil probe, a GPS unit, and a worn leather pouch for his findings. At 63, Dale was one of the last of a dying breed, a licensed ginseng harvester. He'd been digging ginseng in these mountains for 40 years, following the same routes his father had taught him as a boy. American ginseng, Panax quinquefolius, was worth more per pound than gold on the Asian market. The wild roots, with their distinctive forked shape, were prized in traditional medicine. But wild ginseng was increasingly rare, over-harvested to the point where most states heavily regulated its collection. Tennessee required a license, restricted the season, and imposed strict limits on harvest. Dale had his license renewed every year without fail. He knew his territory, a remote section of the park that few tourists ever reached, accessible only by an overgrown old logging road that required a 4-wheel drive vehicle and local knowledge to navigate. The morning hike took him 2 hours, climbing steadily through dense forest. Dale moved slowly, methodically, his eyes scanning the forest floor for the telltale 3-pronged leaves. Ginseng was shade-loving, typically growing on north-facing slopes beneath hardwood canopies. By mid-morning, he'd found 3 small plants, enough to make the trip worthwhile, but nothing exceptional. Then, pushing through a thicket of mountain laurel, he entered a small clearing dominated by a massive white oak, its trunk easily 5 feet in diameter. And there, at the base of the oak, was the most remarkable ginseng plant Dale had ever seen. The plant stood nearly 3 feet tall, far larger than typical wild ginseng. Its leaves were deep green and lush, spread in a perfect canopy. But it was the ground around the plant that made Dale pause. The soil was darker here, richer. And there was a smell, faint but distinct, of something more than just forest mulch. Dale approached carefully. Ginseng this size could have a root system worth several $1,000s. He knelt beside the plant, running his fingers through the loose soil. The earth felt wrong, too soft, too disturbed for natural forest floor. He began to dig, using his small hand trowel to work around the plant's base. 6 inches down, his trowel hit something that wasn't root, something pale and hard. Dale cleared more soil. The object was curved, off-white, with a texture that made his stomach drop. It was bone, human bone. Dale jerked his hand back, his heart hammering. He was a Vietnam veteran. He'd seen death before. But finding it here, in the quiet forest, 40 years later, was a shock that left him momentarily paralyzed. He forced himself to look closer. The bone appeared to be part of a rib cage, and there, partially exposed in the shallow depression, were fragments of fabric, something dark, deteriorated, but still intact enough to recognize as synthetic material. Dale stood up, his hands shaking. He pulled out his cell phone. No signal. He'd expected that. This area was a dead zone. He marked the location on his GPS unit, took several photographs with his phone's camera, and began the 2-hour hike back to his truck. The moment he reached an area with service, he called 911. The response was swift but complicated by logistics. The site Dale described was in one of the most remote sections of the park, accessible only by helicopter or a difficult overland hike. By the time a forensic team could be assembled and transported, it was late afternoon. Special Agent Rebecca Torres of the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation led the response team. She'd worked dozens of cases involving remains found in wilderness areas, suicides, accidents, occasionally homicides. But something about this report, the deliberate burial, the remote location, set off her professional instincts. The helicopter dropped them in a clearing half a mile from Dale's coordinates. The team, 4 forensic specialists, 2 park rangers, and Agent Torres, hiked in carrying equipment cases. Dale was waiting at the site, sitting on a fallen log 20 feet from the oak tree. He looked pale and tired. He stood as they approached. "I didn't touch anything else," he said. "Just uncovered enough to be sure of what it was." Agent Torres thanked him and directed the team to establish a perimeter. The forensic specialists began documenting the scene, photographing everything from multiple angles before any further excavation occurred. The ginseng plant was even more striking in person, abnormally large, almost grotesque in its vigor. One of the forensic techs, a woman named Carla Rodriguez, knelt beside it and carefully examined the soil. "There's definitely something decomposing here," she said quietly. "The plant's root system is extensive, probably feeding on nutrient-rich soil." The team began a careful excavation, removing soil in controlled layers, sifting everything through screens. 18 inches down, they uncovered more bones, vertebrae, ribs, a pelvis. All human, all showing signs of advanced decomposition consistent with several years of burial. As the excavation continued, the team made a critical discovery. Wrapped loosely around some of the bones was a length of rope, thick, braided blue and white nylon. The material was weathered but still intact, suggesting it was synthetic, designed to resist decay. Agent Torres photographed the rope from every angle. This wasn't natural. This was something someone had brought into the forest. By dusk, the team had exposed most of the skeleton. The remains were those of an adult, but gender and identity would require further analysis. What was clear was that this person had been buried deliberately in a location chosen for its remoteness. The remains were carefully removed, still partially wrapped in the deteriorated rope, and placed in body bags for transport. The team worked by portable lights as darkness fell, documenting every detail of the burial site. The following morning, the remains arrived at the medical examiner's office in Knoxville. Dr. Amit Kapoor, the chief medical examiner, began his analysis. The skeleton was largely complete, which was fortunate. It provided substantial information. Based on pelvic structure and skull morphology, Dr. Kapoor determined the remains were male, approximately 30-35 years old at time of death, height estimated around 6 feet, but determining identity required more. Dr. Kapoor examined the teeth. Several had dental work, including 2 crowns and 3 fillings. He photographed and documented every restoration. Agent Torres had already pulled records on missing persons in the region from the past decade. When Dr. Kapoor's dental documentation was complete, she began the painstaking process of comparison. The match came within 48 hours. The dental records aligned perfectly with those of Marcus Whitfield, missing since June 2015. The confirmation landed like a bomb blast through the investigation. Agent Torres immediately contacted Patricia Brennan. The conversation was brief, professional, and devastating. Marcus had been found. Patricia's worst fears, suspended in uncertainty for 4 years, were now confirmed reality. But the confirmation raised more questions than it answered. The autopsy continued. Dr. Kapoor examined every bone for signs of trauma. He found them on the left ribs. 2 ribs showed healing fractures, old breaks that had occurred weeks or months before death. But more significantly, he found evidence of acute trauma. 3 ribs on the right side were fractured in a pattern consistent with significant blunt force. The fractures showed no signs of healing, meaning they occurred at or near time of death. The skull showed additional trauma, a depressed fracture on the right parietal bone, the kind of injury that would result from a heavy impact. Dr. Kapoor's preliminary conclusion: the injuries were consistent with an animal attack. Specifically, the pattern matched documented cases of black bear attacks, the combination of blunt force trauma from powerful paws and the tearing, crushing injuries from bites. Black bears were common in the Smokies. Attacks on humans were rare, but not unheard of, particularly if a bear was surprised, injured, or protecting cubs. But this explanation created new problems. If Marcus had died from a bear attack, who buried him? And where were Hannah and Lily? Agent Torres stood in the morgue, staring at the evidence laid out on the examination table: the bones, the rope, the scraps of clothing. The rope was the key. She'd sent samples to the FBI laboratory for detailed analysis. The results came back 3 days later. The rope was marine-grade nylon, typically used in boating applications. It was manufactured by a specific company and sold primarily through marine supply stores. The analysis also revealed trace evidence embedded in the rope's fibers: microscopic wood particles identified as eastern red cedar and residual oil, consistent with chainsaw bar oil, cedar, and chainsaw oil. The connection to timber poaching was immediate and undeniable. Agent Torres pulled the files from the 2015 investigation. The illegal logging activity discovered during the original search had never been fully resolved. She cross-referenced the locations. The poaching site from 2015 was roughly 3 miles from where Marcus's body had been found. The investigation had a new direction. Agent Torres assembled a task force focused specifically on illegal timber operations in the Smokies. Over the next 2 weeks, they conducted a comprehensive review of poaching incidents dating back 5 years. One name appeared repeatedly in intelligence reports: Vernon Griggs. Griggs, 52, was a former commercial logger who'd lost his business in 2008 during the recession. He'd grown up in Sevier County, 4th-generation Tennessee mountain people. He knew the Smokies better than most park rangers, and according to confidential informants, he'd been running a timber poaching operation for years, targeting high-value hardwoods and selling them through a network of unscrupulous sawmills. Vernon had been questioned in 2015 during the original investigation but never charged. There hadn't been enough evidence to connect him to the Whitfield disappearance. Now, with Marcus's body discovered and the rope evidence pointing to logging operations, Vernon became the primary focus. Investigators began 24-hour surveillance. Vernon lived alone in a single-wide trailer on 10 acres of heavily wooded property outside Gatlinburg. The property was accessible via a gravel road that dead-ended at his trailer. Neighbors were sparse, the nearest residence over a mile away. But surveillance revealed something more. Using aerial photography and property records, investigators discovered that Vernon owned a second structure, an old hunting cabin on a remote parcel 6 miles into the national forest, accessed by an abandoned logging road. The cabin was in an area closed to public access, deep in the backcountry. The cabin's location was significant. It was roughly 6 miles from where Marcus's body had been found. Agent Torres applied for a search warrant, presenting the evidence to a federal magistrate judge. The rope connecting to logging operations, Vernon's history of timber poaching, the proximity of his cabin to the burial site, and his previous questioning in 2015. The warrant was granted. The tactical team assembled before dawn on October 2, 2019. The plan was to execute simultaneous raids on both Vernon's trailer and the remote cabin. Agent Torres would lead the cabin raid. That's where they expected to find answers. The convoy moved through pre-dawn darkness, 4 vehicles driving slowly along the overgrown logging road, their headlights cutting through thick morning fog. The cabin appeared suddenly in the gloom, a small structure, maybe 20 by 20 feet, built from rough-cut lumber and chinked with mud. The roof was corrugated metal, red with rust. A small porch sagged at the front entrance. The team deployed rapidly, surrounding the structure. 2 agents approached the door, while others covered windows and the rear exit. "Federal agents, search warrant." No response came from inside. An agent tested the door, locked. A second agent swung a battering ram. The door crashed inward. The cabin's interior was a single room, cramped and cluttered. A wood stove dominated one corner. A small table and 2 chairs sat in the center. Shelves lined the walls, holding canned goods, tools, and supplies. The air smelled of mildew, wood smoke, and something else, something chemical, like cleaning agents. The cabin was empty of people, but it wasn't empty of evidence. On the table, investigators found maps, topographic maps of the park with handwritten notes marking specific tree locations and access routes. Under the table, they discovered coils of the same blue and white marine-grade rope that had been found with Marcus's body. In the corner, covered with a tarp, they found chainsaw equipment, 2 chainsaws, chains, bar oil, and wedges. Wood chips were scattered on the floor, and when analyzed later, they'd match the cedar particles from the rope. But the most significant discovery came when an agent noticed an anomaly in the cabin's floor plan. The interior dimensions didn't match the exterior. There was space unaccounted for. They found the entrance behind a shelf unit, a wooden hatch set into the floor, secured with a heavy padlock. An agent cut the lock with bolt cutters and lifted the hatch. A ladder descended into darkness. The smell that rose from the opening was unmistakable: decay, mildew, and the sickly sweet odor of death. Agent Torres descended with her flashlight and her weapon drawn. The space below was a storm shelter, dug directly into the earth with rough wooden walls and a dirt floor. The ceiling was barely 6 feet high. The beam of Torres's flashlight revealed a small space, no more than 10 feet square, and in the far corner, partially covered by a deteriorated canvas tarp, were human remains. The excavation of the storm shelter took hours. The remains were in advanced decomposition, reduced mostly to bones with some mummified tissue preserved by the dry, cool conditions below ground. The clothing fragments were more intact, scraps of blue fabric, the remnants of what appeared to be a T-shirt, and leggings. Patricia Brennan had described what Hannah was wearing the day they disappeared: a bright blue shirt and dark blue leggings. Among the remains, investigators found personal effects that confirmed identity beyond doubt: a silver necklace with a small pendant shaped like a book, and a wallet still containing Hannah Whitfield's driver's license, the photo faded but recognizable. Dr. Kapoor performed the autopsy the following day. The cause of death was evident even from skeletal remains. The hyoid bone in the neck was fractured, the classic indicator of manual strangulation. Hannah had been murdered, but there was no sign of baby Lily. The cabin and surrounding area were searched meticulously. Cadaver dogs were brought in to sweep the property. Ground-penetrating radar scanned the earth around the cabin. Every inch of the storm shelter was examined. There were no infant remains. Investigators found something else instead, a small cardboard box hidden in the cabin's rafters. Inside were items that clearly belonged to a baby, a yellow blanket covered in duck prints, 2 small onesies, a half-empty container of formula, and a pacifier. The items were dirty, but intact. Lily had been at the cabin, but where was she now? Vernon Griggs was arrested at his trailer without resistance. He was transported to the Sevier County Jail and placed in an interrogation room. Agent Torres entered at 2 p.m., carrying a thick file folder. She set it on the table and sat down across from Vernon. Vernon was a large man, 6'2", heavily built, with a gray beard and weathered skin. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt. His expression was guarded but not hostile. "You know why you're here, Vernon," Torres began. "I want a lawyer," he said. "That's your right. But before your lawyer gets here, I want you to understand what we found. We found Marcus Whitfield's body. We found your rope wrapped around his bones. We found Hannah Whitfield in your storm shelter, and we found baby items in your cabin." Vernon's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "Here's what I think happened," Torres continued, her voice calm and factual. "I think Marcus and Hannah were hiking in June 2015. I think they went off trail. Maybe they saw something interesting. Maybe they were looking for a quiet place for the baby, and they stumbled onto your logging operation. They saw you cutting trees. They saw your truck, your equipment, and you knew that if they reported you, you were done, so you followed them." Vernon stared at the table. "Marcus was a park ranger. He knew what you were doing was illegal. He probably told you he was going to report it. Maybe there was an argument. And then something went wrong." Torres opened the file folder and pulled out a photograph. Marcus's skull, showing the depressed fracture. She slid it across the table. "This wasn't a bear attack, Vernon. This was blunt force trauma. You hit Marcus Whitfield with something heavy, a log, maybe a tool, and then you watched him die." Vernon's hands, resting on the table, began to tremble slightly. "But Hannah and the baby were there, and you couldn't let them go. So you forced them back to your cabin. You kept them in that shelter, and when you realized you couldn't risk letting Hannah live, you killed her." Torres pulled out another photograph, the fractured hyoid bone. "Where's the baby, Vernon? Where's Lily?" For a long moment, Vernon said nothing. Then, slowly, he raised his eyes to meet Torres's gaze. "I need immunity," he said quietly, "for the baby. I need immunity for what happened to the baby, or I don't say anything." Torres felt her pulse quicken. "Tell me she's alive." Vernon nodded slowly. "I didn't hurt her. I swear to God I didn't hurt that baby." The negotiation took 3 hours. Vernon's public defender arrived, and a federal prosecutor was brought in. The terms were clear. Vernon would receive life imprisonment without parole for the murders of Marcus and Hannah Whitfield. In exchange for cooperation in locating Lily, if she was found alive and returned safely, additional charges related to the child would be dropped. Vernon signed the agreement at 6:47 p.m. Agent Torres returned to the interrogation room with a recorder and a map. "Start talking," she said. Vernon took a breath. "It happened like you said. They came up on me while I was working, cutting a big old walnut on the North Ridge, June 13th. I'd been working that spot for 2 days, had the tree down, was sectioning it. They came around the bend, and there I was with my chainsaw, cutting up a tree that was worth 10 grand. The guy, Marcus, he recognized what I was doing right away. He starts telling me I'm under arrest, that he's a ranger, all that. I tried to talk him down, told him we could work it out, but he wasn't hearing it. He pulled out his phone, said he was calling it in. I panicked. I had the felling axe right there. I picked it up and I hit him. I didn't mean to kill him. I just wanted him to stop. But I hit him hard, right on the side of the head. He went down immediately." Vernon paused, his hands shaking. "The woman, Hannah." She started screaming. The baby was crying. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't let her go report it. So I told her I'd kill the baby if she ran. I made her pick up the baby and walk back to the cabin. Torres's stomach churned, but she kept her expression neutral. What happened at the cabin? I kept them in the shelter. I didn't know what else to do. I gave them food, water. The baby formula, I drove into Knoxville to buy it, used cash at a Walmart, so nobody'd remember. I kept them there for 3 days while I tried to figure out what to do. Hannah kept begging me to let them go. She said she wouldn't tell anyone, just let her and the baby go. But I knew she was lying. I knew the moment I let her go, I was done. So on the 3rd night, I went down there and He trailed off. You strangled her, Torres said flatly. Vernon nodded, not meeting her eyes. I couldn't live with what I'd done, but I couldn't go to prison either. I wrapped Marcus's body in the tarp, dragged it 3 miles into the woods, and buried it where I thought nobody'd ever find it. I put Hannah in the shelter and covered her up. And the baby? Vernon looked up. I couldn't kill a baby, I just couldn't. I knew she'd die if I left her there, and I couldn't do that, so I took her. Where? I drove to Kentucky, took me 4 hours. There's a couple I knew. Well, I didn't know them exactly, but I knew of them, the Prestons. They lived on a farm outside Lexington. Word was they'd been trying to have kids for years, couldn't. They were the type that wouldn't ask too many questions if someone showed up with a baby that needed a home. Torres leaned forward. You sold her. No, Vernon said quickly. I didn't take money. I told them I was a relative, that the mother couldn't care for the baby anymore, that I needed to find her a good home. They asked a few questions, but not many. They wanted to believe me. I handed over the baby, gave them the formula and the bottles I had, and I left. Names, Torres said. I need full names and address. Vernon provided them. David and Carol Preston. They had a farm on Route 4 outside Lexington. That was 4 years ago. I don't know if they're still there. Agent Torres contacted the FBI's Crimes Against Children unit immediately. Within 2 hours, a team was assembled in Kentucky. The Preston farm was exactly where Vernon described it, a modest house on 20 acres, with horses grazing in a paddock and a large barn painted white. Lights were on in the house as FBI vehicles pulled into the driveway at 9:30 p.m. David Preston answered the door, a man in his 50s, wearing jeans and a sweatshirt, confusion evident on his face as he saw the badges. David Preston? Yes? FBI, we need to talk to you about a child that may be in your home. The color drained from Preston's face. What? Sir, we have information that 4 years ago you took custody of an infant girl under questionable circumstances. We need to see the child. Carol Preston appeared behind her husband, a thin woman with graying hair. David, what's going on? An agent stepped forward with a photo, the picture of Lily that Patricia had provided 4 years ago, the 7-month-old with wispy blonde hair. This child, the agent said. Carol's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God. Is she here? Agent Torres asked, having flown to Kentucky on a bureau plane. Carol nodded slowly. She's upstairs, asleep. Her name is, we call her Emma. The Prestons were separated and questioned. Their story was consistent. In June 2015, a man named Vernon had shown up at their door with a baby. He'd said he was a distant relative, that the baby's mother had died of an overdose, that there was no one else to take the child. He'd provided no paperwork, no birth certificate. The Prestons, desperate for a child and not wanting to look too closely at the gift they'd been given, had taken her. They'd never filed for legal adoption. They'd homeschooled Emma to avoid the scrutiny that would come with enrolling her in school. They'd lived in fear for 4 years that someone would ask questions. At 10:15 p.m., Agent Torres climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor. A small bedroom at the end of the hall had a nightlight glowing. She pushed the door open gently. A child's bed held a sleeping girl, about 4 years old, with blonde hair spread across her pillow. She was wearing pajamas with cartoon characters. Torres approached quietly and knelt beside the bed. The child stirred, sensing someone nearby. Her eyes fluttered open, blue eyes, clear and curious, and she looked up at the stranger without fear, just confusion. "Hi, sweetheart," Torres said softly. "My name is Rebecca. I'm a friend. Everything's going to be okay." Lily blinked slowly, still groggy from sleep. "Where's Mama?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. Torres felt her throat tighten. "She's downstairs, honey, but I need to talk to you for just a minute. Are you okay? Do you need anything?" Lily rubbed her eyes with one small fist, then shook her head. "I'm sleepy." "I know, sweetheart. You can go back to sleep soon. I just wanted to make sure you were okay." Lily studied Torres for a moment with that direct, guileless gaze children have. Then she reached for the stuffed rabbit beside her pillow and pulled it close. "Okay," she said simply, and closed her eyes again. Torres stayed kneeling there for a long moment, watching the child's breathing slow and deepen, her small chest rising and falling. This was Lily Whitfield, alive, safe. After 4 years of horror and loss, here was something that had survived. Within 24 hours, DNA testing confirmed what everyone already knew. The child the Prestons had called Emma for 4 years was Lily Whitfield. Patricia Brennan received the call at 11 p.m. on October 3, 2019. She was in her living room, where she'd spent so many sleepless nights over the past 4 years. When Agent Torres told her that Lily had been found alive and well, Patricia collapsed to her knees, the phone pressed to her ear, sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe. 2 days later, Patricia flew to Kentucky. The reunion took place in a child services office, supervised by counselors trained in traumatic family separations. Lily, now 4 years old, didn't remember her grandmother, didn't remember the first 7 months of her life. To her, the Prestons were the only parents she'd ever known. But Patricia held her granddaughter for the first time in 4 years, felt the weight of her in her arms, and whispered, "You're home now. You're finally home." Vernon Griggs pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and a litany of federal charges related to the crimes. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In his final statement to the court, he said only, "I'm sorry," though whether he meant it or simply wanted mercy, no one could say. David and Carol Preston were charged with custodial interference and harboring a missing child. They cooperated fully with authorities and received suspended sentences in exchange for their testimony. They were prohibited from any contact with Lily. In a letter read in court, Carol Preston wrote, "We loved her as our own, but we knew in our hearts that something was wrong. We were selfish and cowardly, and we stole 4 years from a family that had already lost everything. We will carry that for the rest of our lives." The Great Smoky Mountains remain one of America's most visited and most dangerous national parks. The forests keep their secrets, and every year people vanish into the ancient trees. Most are found, some are not. Marcus and Hannah Whitfield were laid to rest together in a cemetery in Knoxville, their graves marked by a single headstone that reads, "Beloved parents, together forever." The service was attended by hundreds, friends, family, park rangers, and searchers who'd never given up hope. Patricia Brennan became Lily's legal guardian. The transition was difficult. Lily struggled to understand why she'd been taken from the only home she remembered, why these new people called her by a different name. Child psychologists worked with her for months, gently helping her process the upheaval. Patricia was patient, allowing the relationship to develop slowly, never forcing the connection. She showed Lily photographs of Marcus and Hannah, told her stories about her parents, helped her understand that she was loved, that she'd always been loved, even in the years they were apart. In time, Lily began to call Patricia Grandma, not because she remembered, but because she learned. And Patricia learned, too, that some losses can never be fully healed, but that survival is its own form of grace. 2 years after the reunion, on a quiet Tuesday evening in spring, Patricia and Lily sat together on the living room floor. An old photo album opened between them. It had become their ritual. Every few nights, one photograph, one story. Lily, now 6, would trace her finger over the glossy surfaces, asking questions that Patricia answered with measured gentleness. That night, Lily pointed to a picture she'd seen before, but never really studied. A 7-month-old baby in a blue carrier, pressed against a man's chest, tiny fingers reaching for his beard. "That's me?" she asked, though she knew the answer. "That's you," Patricia said, "and that's your daddy. This was taken 2 days before." She stopped, her throat closing around the words she could never quite finish. Lily looked up, her blue eyes, Hannah's eyes, searching her grandmother's face. "Can I see the video again?" Patricia's hands trembled as she reached for the tablet on the coffee table. She'd shown Lily the 11-second clip only once before, 6 months ago, when the therapist said she might be ready. She pulled it up now, the thumbnail image frozen on Hannah's smiling face. "Are you sure, sweetheart?" Lily nodded. Patricia pressed play. Hannah's voice filled the small room bright and alive. Day 2 of Operation Get Lily to Love Nature. The camera panned to Marcus walking ahead, Lily's hand reaching up. "Marcus, wave to Grandma." The exaggerated wave, Lily's squeal, 11 seconds, then silence. Lily stared at the blank screen, her small body perfectly still, her lips parted slightly as if she were trying to taste the sound of her mother's voice, to hold it on her tongue. "Play it again," she whispered. Patricia played it 3 more times. On the 4th replay, she noticed Lily's hand had moved to her own throat, fingers pressed against the soft hollow there, as if trying to feel the vibration of that voice inside herself. When the video ended the final time, Lily looked up. "Why don't I remember?" Her voice cracked on the last word. "Why can't I remember her saying my name?" Patricia set the tablet down and pulled Lily close. "You were so little, honey, only 7 months old, but that doesn't mean you weren't loved. That doesn't mean they didn't know you." "But I should remember," Lily insisted, and now tears were sliding down her cheeks. "I should remember something." Patricia was quiet for a moment, then stood slowly. "Wait here." She walked to her bedroom closet, to the cardboard box she'd kept sealed for 2 years, the one Agent Torres had given her containing the items recovered from Vernon's cabin. Her hands shook as she lifted the lid. The yellow blanket sat folded on top, laundered multiple times by the FBI lab, tested for evidence, returned sterile and clean, but still bearing the faintest shadow of its original softness. She carried it back to the living room and knelt beside Lily. "This was yours," she said quietly. "Your mom picked it out before you were born. She saw the little ducks and said they looked happy, and she wanted you to always have something happy close to you." Lily reached out slowly, her fingertips brushing the worn cotton. Then, without thinking, she pulled it to her face. Patricia watched her granddaughter inhale, a deep, instinctive breath, and saw something shift in the child's expression. Not recognition exactly, something deeper, cellular, a knowing that lived below memory, in the place where an infant's first sense of safety resides. Lily buried her face in the blanket, her small shoulders beginning to shake. "It smells like—" She couldn't finish, didn't have words for what she was feeling. The phantom scent of a mother she couldn't remember, but whose absence she'd carried like a second skeleton inside her bones. Patricia gathered both Lily and the blanket into her arms, rocking slowly. "She held you in this," she whispered, against Lily's hair. "Every night. She'd wrap you up and sing to you, and you'd fall asleep listening to her heartbeat." "What did she sing?" "Everything. Lullabies, pop songs. She'd make up silly rhymes about ducks and trees and whatever she saw that day." Patricia's voice broke. "She had a terrible singing voice, Lily. Truly awful. But you didn't care. You'd just stare up at her like she was singing you, the music of the universe." Lily clutched the blanket tighter, her tears soaking into the faded yellow fabric, the same fabric that had once absorbed her infant drool, her mother's tears, the cabin's darkness, And now this, the grief of a child mourning people she'd never consciously known, but whose absence had shaped every day of her life. They sat like that for a long time, grandmother and granddaughter, wrapped around a yellow blanket covered in ducks, while somewhere in the darkness outside, the mountains kept their vigil, ancient and patient, and knowing that some weights can only be carried together. When Lily finally spoke, her voice was muffled against Patricia's shoulder. "Can I keep it? The blanket?" "It's yours, sweetheart. It was always yours." That night, Lily fell asleep with the blanket pressed to her chest, one small fist clutched around its corner, the way she must have done as an infant. Patricia stood in the doorway of the bedroom, watching the rise and fall of her granddaughter's breathing, and allowed herself to believe, for the first time in 4 years, that healing wasn't about remembering everything. Sometimes it was about holding on to the small, soft things that survived. Sometimes it was about learning that love doesn't require memory to be real. Dale Hutchins, the ginseng hunter who'd made the discovery, never returned to that section of the forest. He renewed his license the following year but worked different territory, unable to shake the memory of uncovering death in a place he'd always considered sacred. He thought often about the strange, vigorous ginseng plant, how it had drawn him to that spot, how nature recycles everything, grief and bone and loss, into new growth. It disturbed him in ways he couldn't articulate, the idea that beauty could feed on tragedy, that life could flourish in the soil of death. The case closed officially in December 2019, but its echoes lingered. The story became a cautionary tale told by rangers to visitors. Stay on marked trails, respect the wilderness, understand that the forest is beautiful and indifferent and vast beyond comprehension, that it can swallow you whole and hold you for years, that sometimes the only witness to tragedy is the slow, patient growth of roots in dark earth, and that sometimes, rarely mercifully, the forest gives back what it has taken. Thanks for watching. If this case got to you, hit like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so you don't miss the next mystery. See you soon.